Americans are very contradictory creatures. We admire the Founding Fathers with an almost cult-like devotion, and yet huge numbers of us don't participate in the representative democracy they pioneered. We have one of the lowest voter turnout rates in the developed world, ranking 26th out of 32 countries. If Didn't Vote had been a candidate in the 2016 election, it would have won by a landslide. In fact, Didn't Vote would have won every single presidential election in the last 100 years. In 2016, only about 56% of eligible voters cast a ballot. So what happened to the more than 100 million people who didn't vote? Recent surveys and studies show that among many factors, there are three major reasons why people don't vote. Reason number one, they believe voting doesn't make a difference. Among non-voters, especially young ones, this is the number one reason for staying home on election day. According to recent surveys, roughly 2/3 of non-voters say they don't pay much attention to politics because it is so corrupt. Only 22% of voters believe the two-party system does a good job of representing the will of the American people. This becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. People refuse to participate, which reduces their representation in government, which adds to their sense that they are not being represented, which then reinforces their lack of participation. Reason number two, the system discourages participation. The most accurate predictor of whether someone will vote or not isn't race, ethnicity, age, or gender. It's their level of education and income. As a rule, wealthy college-educated people vote at much higher rates than low-income uneducated individuals. The result is that low-income communities have a harder time getting fair representation at every level of government. Again, it's a vicious circle. People don't vote, they lose representation, and so they become disillusioned and continue to stay away from the polls. And this doesn't include deliberate efforts by lawmakers across the country, more often Republicans, to lower turnout among low-income populations and minorities, who tend to vote for Democrats. This leads to a perfect storm of disenfranchisement. Gerrymandered districts, restrictive voter ID laws, and lack of access to early voting are all examples of efforts to lower voter turnout among specific groups of people. Reason number three, voters are confused. Because each state has its own registration deadlines, voter ID requirements, and early voting schedules, many potential voters simply don't know what's required of them to be able to vote. This lack of uniformity hits younger voters particularly hard. Their lives are typically more transient because of college and work, so they are less likely to feel connected to local politics. When you add in their lack of enthusiasm for politics in general, the result is extremely low youth voter turnout. Even though the millennial population is almost as big as the baby boomer population, in the 2014 midterm elections, only 16% of eligible voters aged 18 to 29 went to the polls. So what's the solution? The heart of the problem is that people don't trust our political system. Unfortunately, this is a long-term problem that we're going to be working on for decades. In the meantime, we can learn from other developed democracies that have found easy and common sense ways to boost voter turnout. Automatic voter registration and early voting access have already increased voter turnout in several states. And in other countries, shorter election cycles, online voting, and weekend elections have all resulted in higher voter turnout. Don't forget that in a democracy, the people have the power to change the system. Voting is the ultimate expression of that power. So please, go out and vote, and let's make the Founding Fathers proud.